He married a billionaire he barely knew. Not for love, not for money, but because she had 72 hours to save everything her family built, and he was the only person desperate enough to say yes. What started as a contract became the most dangerous decision of both their lives. If you want to see how a single father and a woman with everything to lose bet it all on a stranger, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and let me see just how far this story travels. The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Ethan Cole was sitting on the kitchen floor of his two-bedroom apartment in downtown Chicago, his back against the dishwasher, a half-eaten bowl of cereal balanced on his knee. His daughter, Lily, had been asleep for about an hour. The apartment smelled like the lavender fabric softener he always used on her sheets because she'd once told him it smelled like clouds, and he'd never had the heart to switch brands. His phone buzzed against the tile. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. He'd been getting spam calls all week, but something made him pick up. Ethan Cole? A woman's voice. Clipped, professional, slightly breathless. Yeah, who's this? My name is Sandra Voss. I'm the executive assistant to Catherine Ellison. Ms. Ellison needs to see you tonight. Ethan set the cereal bowl on the floor. Catherine Ellison, as in Ellison Hospitality Group. That's correct? It's almost midnight. I'm aware of the time, Mr. Cole. He rubbed his eyes. Catherine Ellison was one of those names that floated around the edges of every corporate boardroom in the country. Her family's hotel empire spanned 4 continents. The kind of money that didn't just open doors, it built them. I don't do midnight consultations, Ethan said. Tell her to call my office in the morning. My assistant can set up... Mr. Cole... Sandra's voice dropped half an octave. She specifically asked for you. She said to tell you this is a monarch-level situation. Ethan went still. Monarch level. That was a term he'd coined himself years ago in a white paper he'd written for a crisis management journal. It meant the kind of corporate emergency where the entire power structure of a company could collapse within days. He'd used it maybe 3 times in his actual career. The fact that Catherine Ellison knew the term and was using it correctly told him 2 things. She'd done her homework on him, and whatever was happening was bad. Where? He asked. The Ellison Grand Penthouse Suite. There will be a car outside your building in 12 minutes. I have a daughter. She's 5. She's sleeping. A pause. Then Sandra said, Can someone stay with her? Ethan closed his eyes. His neighbor, Mrs. Huang, was a retired schoolteacher who'd watched Lily before in emergencies. She had a key. She told him once that she never slept before 2 anyway because she watched Korean dramas until her eyes gave out. Give me 15 minutes, he said. The car will wait. He hung up, stood, and looked around his kitchen. The cereal bowl on the floor, the crayon drawing Lily had taped to the fridge that morning. A purple horse with 7 legs, and a smile that took up half its face. The stack of unpaid bills on the counter that he kept meaning to sort through. Ethan Cole was 32 years old, and for the last 3 years, every decision he'd made had been filtered through one question. What does Lily need? He'd left his job at a top-tier consulting firm because the travel was eating him alive. He'd started his own practice, just him, a laptop, and a reputation for being the guy companies called when everything was falling apart. He was good at it. Good enough to keep the lights on and keep Lily in a decent school. Not good enough to stop worrying about money every single month. He knocked on Mrs. Huang's door softly. She answered in a bathrobe covered in cartoon cats, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. Lily's asleep, he said. Emergency work thing. I don't know how long. Mrs. Huang studied him for a moment. She had a way of looking at people that made them feel like she was reading a very honest book about them. You eat dinner? She asked. I had cereal. That's not dinner. Go. I'll sleep on your couch. Thank you. Seriously. Bring me back one of those fancy hotel chocolates, she said, and shut her door to get her things. The car was a black sedan with tinted windows. The driver didn't speak. They cut through the city toward the lakefront, and Ethan watched the buildings slide past, their windows lit up in patterns that always made him think of advent calendars. Chicago at midnight had a quality he'd never been able to name, something between loneliness and defiance. The Ellison Grand was a 42-story glass tower on Michigan Avenue. He'd been inside once, years ago, for a conference. The lobby alone had made him feel like he was wearing the wrong shoes. Tonight, the lobby was nearly empty. A security guard met him at the entrance, checked his ID, and led him to a private elevator. The guard pressed a key card to the panel, and the elevator began to climb without Ethan touching a button. 42nd floor. The doors opened into a hallway that was more like a gallery, dark wood, recessed lighting, a single abstract painting on the far wall that probably cost more than his apartment. Sandra Voss was waiting. She was maybe 45, tall, with hair pulled back so tightly it looked like it was under contractual obligation to stay in place. "This way," she said, and led him through a set of double doors into the penthouse suite. The first thing Ethan noticed was that the room was a mess. Not in the way hotel rooms get messy. Shoes kicked off, minibar raided. This was a working mess. Legal documents covered every flat surface. 2 laptops were open on the dining table, both displaying spreadsheets dense enough to give a person a headache from across the room. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat on the coffee table next to a glass with a lipstick mark on the rim. Catherine Ellison was standing by the window, her back to him, looking out at Lake Michigan. The city lights played against the glass, and for a second she looked like a reflection of something rather than a real person. She turned. She was younger than he'd expected. The photos he'd seen in business magazines had always made her look severe, polished, untouchable. In person, she looked like someone who hadn't slept in 2 days. Her dark hair was loose, her blouse untucked on one side. She was holding her phone in one hand, and her grip on it was so tight that her knuckles had gone pale. "You're Ethan Cole," she said, not a question. "And you're the person who pulled me away from a very important bowl of cereal." She didn't smile. Her eyes moved over him, assessing, calculating the way people look at things they're about to buy or break. "Sit down," she said. "I'll stand for now." Something shifted in her expression. A flicker of surprise, maybe, or respect. It was hard to tell. "Sandra, close the door," she said, "and turn off the recorder." Sandra nodded and disappeared. The door clicked shut. Catherine walked to the coffee table, picked up the whiskey glass, looked at it, and set it back down without drinking. "I'm going to tell you something," she said. "And after I tell you, you'll have a choice. You can walk out that door and forget you were ever here. Or you can help me. But you need to understand, if you stay, you're in it. All the way." Ethan folded his arms. "That's a great opening, very dramatic. But I don't sign up for things I don't understand. Tell me what the problem is, and then I'll decide how dramatic I want to be about it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "My father died 11 months ago." "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be. He was a difficult man, brilliant, ruthless, and he spent his entire life making sure everyone around him knew they existed at his pleasure." She paused. "Including me." Ethan said nothing. "When he died, I assumed I'd inherit control of the company. I'd been running day-to-day operations for 3 years. Every major expansion in the last decade had my fingerprints on it. The board knew it, the staff knew it. I thought it was settled. But it wasn't." Catherine reached for a folder on the coffee table. She opened it and held it out to him. "Page 4, she said. Ethan took the folder and flipped to page 4. It was a legal document. Dense, technical, the kind of language that lawyers use when they want to make sure ordinary people can't understand what's being done to them. But Ethan had spent years reading documents exactly like this. His eyes found the relevant clause in under a minute. He read it twice. Then he looked up at her. "This says you have to be legally married by the time the estate finalizes," he said, "or controlling interest passes to your cousin, Marcus Ellison." "Marcus Ellison," she repeated, and the way she said the name made it sound like something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "When does the estate finalize?" 71 days. Ethan set the folder down. "And you're not married?" "No." "Not engaged?" "No." "Not seen anyone who might be interested in a very accelerated timeline?" Catherine's jaw tightened. "I've been running a multi-billion-dollar company for 3 years, Mr. Cole. I haven't had time to water a plant, let alone maintain a relationship." "So your father put a marriage clause in his will?" "He put it in the trust structure. It's tied to the controlling shares." If I'm not legally married when the estate finalizes, the shares revert to the secondary beneficiary. Marcus. Ethan walked to the window and looked out. The lake was a dark sheet below, punctuated by the lights of boats. "Why a marriage clause?" he asked. "What was your father's logic?" Catherine's voice went flat. "My father believed that a woman couldn't be trusted to run an empire alone. He believed that stability required partnership. He told me once, I was 23, I'd just closed the Kyoto deal, the biggest acquisition in the company's history. He told me, 'Catherine, you'll never be enough on your own. You need someone beside you. That's not weakness, that's architecture.' He meant a man. He meant a husband. He wrote that belief into the legal DNA of his company, and then he died before I could change his mind." The room was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," Ethan said again, and this time he meant it differently. Catherine shook her head. "I don't need sympathy. I need a solution. Have your lawyers looked at challenging the clause?" 3 different firms. The clause is airtight. My father hired the best estate attorneys in the country to draft it. They spent 2 years on the trust structure. Every angle has been anticipated. And Marcus, what's his play? Catherine sat down on the edge of the sofa, and for the first time, Ethan saw something crack in her composure. It was small, just a slight slump in her shoulders, a half second where she looked less like a CEO and more like a person who was very, very tired. "Marcus has been waiting for this," she said. "He's been positioning himself for months. He's already met with 3 board members privately. He's been feeding stories to the financial press about my management instability. Last week he told a reporter, off the record of course, which means it'll be on the record within days, that I've been making reckless decisions and that the company needs experienced leadership. Experience meaning males. Experienced meaning him." Ethan sat down across from her. The coffee table between them was covered in papers, and he moved a stack of legal briefs to make room for his elbows. "Catherine, can I call you Catherine?" "You can call me whatever you want if you can fix this." "Catherine, I'm a crisis consultant. I help companies survive bad press, hostile takeovers, regulatory nightmares. I've handled SEC investigations and product recalls and CEO scandals that would make your head spin. But what you're describing isn't a crisis management problem. It's a personal one. Everything personal becomes corporate at a certain level of money, Mr. Cole." Ethan. She leaned forward. "I didn't bring you here for advice. I brought you here because I've read every paper you've ever published. I've studied every case you've handled, and I believe you're the kind of person who can look at an impossible situation and find the structural weakness in it." "And you think there's a structural weakness in a marriage clause?" "I think there's a structural weakness in everything. That's what my father taught me, even if he didn't mean to." Ethan sat back and looked at the ceiling. It was a beautiful ceiling, coffered, painted in cream and gold, the kind of ceiling that people in normal apartments never got to see. "Who else knows about this clause?" he asked. "My legal team, Sandra, Marcus, obviously, and now you." "The board?" "Not the specifics. They know the estate is being finalized. They don't know about the marriage requirement." "How is that possible?" "Because my father structured the trust separately from the corporate bylaws. The board doesn't have access to the trust documents. Only the trustee does." "And who's the trustee?" "Harold Kessler. He was my father's personal attorney for 30 years. "Is he on your side?" Catherine hesitated. "Harold is on Harold's side. He'll execute the terms of the trust exactly as written. He won't bend them for me, but he won't bend them for Marcus either." Ethan nodded slowly. "So the clause is real, the deadline is real, the threat is real. And you brought me here at midnight because—" Catherine stood up. She walked to the window again, and this time she pressed her palm flat against the glass, as if she were testing whether it was actually solid. "I need to get married," she said, "and I have a proposal. You barely know me. I know everything I need to know about you. You're 32, you're a single father. Your daughter's name is Lily. You left Morrison and Daly 3 years ago because you wanted to be present for her, and you've been running your own practice since then. You're good enough to survive, but not thriving enough to stop worrying. You have no criminal record, no outstanding debts beyond standard student loans, and your professional reputation is spotless." Ethan stared at her. "You investigated me." I investigated 11 candidates. You're the one I chose. Candidates? You're talking about this like a job posting. In a way it is. She turned from the window. I need a legal marriage that will satisfy the trust requirements. I need it to be credible enough to withstand scrutiny from Marcus, from the board, and from the press. And I need a partner who understands corporate strategy well enough to play the role convincingly. You're asking me to marry you. I'm asking you to enter into a strategic legal partnership with clearly defined terms, a predetermined timeline, and an exit clause that protects both of us. Right, a marriage. For the first time, the faintest trace of a smile crossed Catherine's face. If you insist on using that word. Ethan stood up and walked to the other side of the room. He needed distance. He needed to think. His brain was doing that thing it did in crisis situations, running scenarios, calculating risks, mapping outcomes. But underneath the professional machinery, there was a simpler voice. The voice that sounded like his own father, who'd been a mechanic in Peoria and who'd once told him, when Ethan was 16 and about to do something stupid, "Son, every decision you make is a door. Make sure you know what's on the other side before you walk through." "What are the terms?" Ethan asked. Catherine sat back down. Her posture changed. Straighter, sharper. This was the CEO now, not the woman who'd slumped on the sofa. Legal marriage within 30 days. That gives us time to establish a credible narrative before the estate finalizes. You'll be compensated. Generously. I'm thinking $2 million paid in installments over the duration of the agreement, plus a trust fund for Lily's education. You're offering me money to marry you? I'm offering you financial security in exchange for professional service. This is a contract, Ethan. It has terms, obligations, and an expiration date. How long? 18 months. After the estate finalizes and the board confirms my position, we'll arrange a quiet, amicable separation. No drama, no headlines. We simply tell the world it didn't work out. And Lily? What happens to my daughter in this scenario? Catherine's expression shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. A softening around the edges that she clearly didn't want him to see. Lily stays with you. She's your daughter, and she's your priority. I would never ask you to compromise that. But she'd be part of it. She'd be living in this arrangement. She'd have to see it, be around it. She's 5. She won't understand. Children are more adaptable than you think. That's something people without children say. The words landed harder than Ethan intended. Catherine's face went still for a moment, and then she nodded. Fair point, she said. I don't have children. I don't know what it's like. But I know what it's like to grow up inside a family where everything was a performance, and I turned out. She stopped. Well, I turned out. The room went quiet. Ethan walked back to the coffee table and picked up the legal folder again. He flipped through the pages slowly, reading the clause 3 more times, looking for angles, looking for cracks. There were none. If I say no, he said, what happens? I find someone else. And if you can't? Then Marcus takes my company. He fires half the workforce within 6 months. He's already said as much to the board members he's been courting. He liquidates the international properties. He turns a 4-generation family legacy into a short-term profit machine and strips it for parts. She paused. And 14,000 people lose their jobs. That's not fair. What part? Using 14,000 jobs to pressure me. I'm not pressuring you. I'm telling you what's at stake. You're a crisis consultant. You asked me to define the crisis. That's the crisis. Ethan set the folder down and pressed his hands flat on the table. He stayed like that for a long time, bent forward, staring at the wood grain, feeling the weight of the decision. He thought about Lily, about the school she was in, which was good but not great, because the great ones cost more than he could swing. About the look on her face that morning when she'd shown him the purple horse drawing and said, "Daddy, this horse can fly because I said so." About the bills on the counter. About the cereal he'd been eating for dinner because he'd been too busy and too broke to cook something real. He thought about what $2 million could do. Not for him. For her. And then he thought about what it would mean to stand next to a woman he barely knew and say words he'd only ever imagined saying to someone he loved. I need conditions, he said. Catherine's eyes sharpened. Name them. First, Lily is never used as a prop. She's not trotted out for photo ops or press events. She's my daughter, not a character in your corporate strategy. Agreed. Second, I retain full professional independence. If I see something wrong in your company, in this arrangement, in anything, I tell you. I don't sugarcoat it, and I don't play along with something I think is a bad idea. I wouldn't have chosen you if I wanted someone who played along. Third, he straightened up. This is a business arrangement, but it has to look real. That means we have to be around each other enough to be convincing. It means I need to know things about you, real things, not the press release version. And you need to know things about me. If Marcus is going to come after this, and he will, we need to be able to answer questions that only people who actually know each other can answer. Catherine was quiet for a moment. You're saying we have to actually get to know each other. I'm saying we have to be honest with each other. At least honest enough to lie convincingly to everyone else. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. That might be the most cynically practical thing anyone has ever said to me. I'm a single dad who eats cereal for dinner and fights corporate fires for a living. Cynically practical is my whole brand. Catherine stood and extended her hand. Do we have an agreement? Ethan looked at her hand. Then he looked at her face. The exhaustion in her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the way she was standing, shoulders back, chin up, as if she could hold together the entire crumbling architecture of her life through sheer posture. He thought about his dad, about doors, about what was on the other side. He took her hand. We have an agreement. Her grip was firm and slightly cold. They shook once, and then she let go. Sandra will send you the preliminary contract tomorrow morning, she said. My legal team will finalize the terms by end of week. We need to move fast. I know. And Ethan? He was already walking toward the door. He stopped. Thank you, she said, for not making me beg. He looked back at her. I don't think you know how to beg. I don't. That's why I'm thanking you. He left. In the elevator going down, Ethan leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. His hands were shaking. He clenched them into fists, then opened them, then clenched them again. What did you just do? He asked himself. The elevator doors opened. The lobby was empty except for the security guard who nodded at him. The black sedan was waiting outside. Ethan got in and gave the driver his address. On the ride home, he stared out the window and thought about Catherine Ellison's face when she'd said the word architecture. The way she'd said it like it was both a weapon and a wound. The way her father had given her everything, talent, ambition, opportunity, and then from beyond the grave had told her it wasn't enough. He thought about his own father, who'd never had money or power or influence, who'd spent his life under cars and come home with grease under his fingernails and a bad back, and who had never once made Ethan feel like he wasn't enough. He pulled out his phone and opened his photos. The most recent one was from that morning, Lily at the kitchen table, holding up her purple horse, grinning so wide that both rows of teeth showed. I'm doing this for you, kid, he whispered. The car pulled up to his building. He went inside, thanked Mrs. Huang, who was asleep on the couch with a Korean drama frozen on the TV screen, covered her with a blanket, and stood in the doorway of Lily's room. She was sleeping on her stomach with one arm hanging off the bed, the way she always did, as if she were reaching for something in a dream. Her nightlight cast soft pink shapes on the ceiling. He watched her breathe for 3 minutes. Then he went to his own room, lay on the bed fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. The next morning started the way every morning started. Lily's voice. Daddy, 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 I had a dream about a fish that could talk and it said my name. That's amazing, Lil. It said Lily in fish language, though, so it sounded like blub blub Lily. Fish are very talented. She climbed onto his bed and sat on his stomach. She weighed maybe 40 pounds, but she had a way of concentrating all of it into her knees. Daddy, why are your shoes on? He looked down. He was still wearing last night's shoes. I fell asleep being silly, he said. Grown-ups aren't supposed to be silly. That's a terrible rule. I'm going to file a complaint. She giggled. It was his favorite sound. Better than any music, any applause, any praise from any client. It was the sound of a person who trusted the world completely, because the world, so far, had given her enough reason to. He made her breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, a banana cut into slices because she insisted bananas tasted better in slices, and walked her to the bus stop. Mrs. Huang appeared in the hallway as they were leaving and pressed a container of homemade dumplings into his hands. "For actual dinner," she said. "Not cereal." "You're a saint, Mrs. Huang." "I'm a woman who knows what a balanced meal looks like. There's a difference." After Lily's bus pulled away, Ethan stood on the sidewalk and checked his phone. 2 emails from Sandra Voss. The first was a calendar invitation for a meeting at the Ellison Grand at 2 p.m. The second was a preliminary contract, 47 pages, attached as a PDF. He went back to his apartment, sat at his desk, and read the entire thing. The terms were exactly as Catherine had described. Legal marriage within 30 days. Compensation of $2 million, paid quarterly. A separate education trust for Lily. $250,000, fully funded at signing. An 18-month duration with a clean dissolution process. Confidentiality provisions that would survive the agreement by 5 years. And a section, page 31, paragraph 4, that specified the physical boundaries of the arrangement. Separate living quarters within a shared residence for appearance purposes. No expectations of intimacy, no obligations beyond the professional scope of the agreement. Ethan read that section 3 times. It was all there. Clean, structured, designed to protect both parties. Catherine's legal team knew what they were doing. But reading it, seeing his name typed out in legal language next to words like spouse and matrimonial obligation, made something twist in his gut. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling of standing at the edge of a very high place and realizing you'd already decided to jump. He closed the PDF and called his own lawyer, David Park. David was a guy he'd known since law school, or rather, since Ethan had dropped out of law school and David had stayed. They'd been friends ever since, connected by the kind of bond that forms between people who take different paths from the same starting point. "David, I need you to look at something." "Good morning to you too." "I'm going to send you a contract. It's unusual." "How unusual?" "Marriage to a billionaire, unusual." Silence. Then David said, "Ethan, what did you do?" "Nothing yet. That's why I need a lawyer." He sent the contract and spent the rest of the morning trying to work on his other cases. He had 3 active clients: a mid-sized tech company dealing with a data breach, a restaurant chain facing a food safety lawsuit, and a nonprofit whose founder had been caught embezzling. Normal crises, the kind he could handle in his sleep. But he couldn't focus. His mind kept circling back to Catherine's face in the penthouse, the controlled desperation in her voice, the way she'd said architecture, like it was a word her father had carved into her bones. At 1:30, he put on a clean shirt, checked himself in the bathroom mirror, and decided he looked like a man who was about to make either the smartest or the most catastrophic decision of his life. "Both," he said to his reflection. "It's probably both." The meeting at the Ellison Grand was in a private conference room on the 38th floor. Sandra met him in the lobby again, and this time she offered him coffee. It was the best coffee he'd ever tasted. He hated that. Catherine was already in the conference room, and she was not alone. 2 men were with her. The first was tall, lean, and gray-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Ethan's car. That would be Harold Kessler, the trustee. The second was younger, early 30s, with sharp features and a tan that looked like it had been purchased at a resort. He was standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Marcus Ellison. "Ah," Marcus said, looking at Ethan, "this must be the consultant." "Mr. Cole," Catherine said, her voice professionally neutral. "Thank you for coming. We're having a brief meeting about the estate timeline. I wanted you here as my strategic advisor." Ethan understood immediately. She hadn't told Marcus about the plan. This was a cover. A way to introduce Ethan into the orbit without revealing his actual role. Smart. "Happy to be here," Ethan said, shaking Harold Kessler's hand. Marcus extended his own hand. His grip was performatively firm, the kind of handshake that was less a greeting and more a contest. "Crisis consultant," Marcus said, looking Ethan up and down. "Must be exciting work. Cleaning up other people's messes." "Someone has to," Ethan said evenly. Harold Kessler cleared his throat. "Shall we sit down?" I have another engagement at 4. They sat around the conference table. Harold walked them through the estate finalization timeline with the mechanical precision of a man who'd been doing this work for decades. Dates, deadlines, filing requirements. All of it delivered in a monotone that suggested he found the entire process as thrilling as tax preparation. Ethan watched Marcus. The cousin sat at the table with the relaxed posture of someone who believed he'd already won. He asked occasional questions, pointed, specific, designed to highlight his knowledge of the company's operations. I've been reviewing the Southeast Asian portfolio, Marcus said at one point. The Bangkok and Jakarta properties have been underperforming. Occupancy rates are down 11% year over year. Occupancy rates are down across the luxury segment in Southeast Asia, Catherine said. That's an industry trend, not a management failure. Trends can be managed. That's the point of leadership. I'm glad you have such strong opinions about leadership, Marcus. You should write a book. I might, after I have more hands-on experience. The subtext was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. Marcus was already positioning himself as the competent alternative. Catherine was fighting to keep her composure. Harold was examining his pen as if it were the most fascinating object in the room. After the meeting, Marcus shook everyone's hand again. He seemed like the type who never missed an opportunity to establish physical dominance, and left with a casual, "See you at the finalization, Catherine." When the door closed behind him, Catherine's professional mask dropped. Not completely. She wasn't the type to fully let go in front of anyone, but enough that Ethan could see the strain underneath. "That was fun," she said. "He's confident," Ethan said. "He's arrogant. There's a difference. Confident people don't need to announce it in every sentence." Harold Kessler stood up and buttoned his jacket. "Catherine, I want to be clear about something. My role is to execute the terms of the trust as your father intended. Whatever decisions you make between now and the finalization, they need to be legally sound. I won't protect you from consequences, and I won't protect Marcus either." "I know, Harold." "Good." He nodded to Ethan. "Mr. Cole." Then he was gone. Catherine and Ethan were alone in the conference room. The city sprawled below them through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The afternoon light cut sharp angles across the table. "He suspects something," Catherine said, meaning Marcus. "Not yet, but he will. A man like that, he's watching. He's got people watching. The minute you and I are seen together more than once, he'll start asking questions. Then we need to build the story before he can write his own version." Ethan nodded. "I had my lawyer look at the contract. He has some questions. I'd be worried if he didn't. He wants to add a clause about Lily, specifically that she is never to be named in any public-facing document related to the arrangement. No press mentions, no social media, nothing. Done? And he wants a morality clause. If either party engages in conduct that could damage the other's reputation, legal trouble, public scandal, anything, the contract becomes voidable." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm going to scandal my way through this?" "I think we're both about to do something that could look very bad if it's not managed perfectly. The morality clause protects us both." She considered this. "Fine. Anything else?" Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Yeah, one more thing." "What?" "If we're going to do this, we need to start now. Not in 30 days. Now. We need to be seen together. Meals, events, normal things. We need to build a timeline that makes sense, a story people can believe. Because Marcus isn't going to challenge the marriage itself. He's going to challenge the credibility of it. He's going to argue that it's fraudulent, that it was arranged specifically to circumvent the trust clause. And if our story has holes, if it looks like we met last Tuesday at midnight and got married 3 weeks later, then his argument writes itself." Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're right. I know. That's why you hired me." She almost smiled. Almost. "So what do you suggest?" "Dinner. Tomorrow night. Somewhere visible but not performative. A place where people might notice us but where it doesn't look like we're staging something." "I know a place." "I'm sure you know 100 places. Pick one that serves food I can actually pronounce." This time she did smile. It was small and it was gone almost immediately, but it was real. "Ethan?" "Yeah, this is going to be hard. For both of us. I want you to know, I don't take this lightly. What I'm asking you to do, what we're about to do, I know it's not nothing. He looked at her. It's not nothing, he agreed, but I've survived worse. Have you? He thought about it. About the year after Lily's mother left, just left, walked out one morning and never came back. No note, no explanation, just an empty closet and a baby who kept looking toward the door. About the months he'd spent learning how to be a parent alone, making every mistake, falling asleep, standing up, burning bottles, crying in the shower because he didn't want Lily to see. Yeah, he said quietly. I have. Catherine held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she nodded and picked up her phone. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock. I'll send you the address. I'll be there. He left the Ellison Grand and walked out into the Chicago afternoon. The wind off the lake was cold, cutting through his jacket, and the street was full of people moving in all directions. Commuters, tourists, a man walking 3 dogs at once, a woman arguing into her phone in a language Ethan didn't recognize. He stood on the sidewalk and let the city move around him. Somewhere above him, on the 42nd floor, a woman he barely knew was planning a war against her own family, and he'd just signed up to fight in it. He pulled out his phone and looked at the photo of Lily again. The purple horse, the giant smile. Then he started walking home. The restaurant Catherine chose was a small Italian place on a side street in Lincoln Park. The kind of spot with mismatched chairs, candles jammed into old wine bottles, and a handwritten menu that changed every week. It was not the kind of place Ethan expected a billionaire to pick, and that fact alone told him something important about her. He arrived 10 minutes early because he always arrived 10 minutes early. It was one of those habits he'd developed after Lily was born, a small way of proving to himself that he still had control over something, even when the rest of his life felt like it was being held together with tape and optimism. Catherine walked in at exactly 7. She was wearing a dark coat over a simple black dress, and she looked different outside the penthouse. Smaller, somehow. More human. She scanned the room the way people do when they're checking for threats they don't expect to find, then spotted him and came to the table. You're early, she said. You're on time. I'm always on time. It's the only thing I control that doesn't require a lawyer. They ordered. She got the risotto. He got the pasta because it was the cheapest thing on the menu, and even though she was about to pay him $2 million, old habits died slow deaths. For the first 20 minutes, they talked about nothing. The weather, the restaurant, a story Ethan told about Lily trying to build a spaceship out of Amazon boxes. Catherine listened with a stillness that he couldn't quite read. It wasn't disinterest, but it wasn't the usual polite nodding people did when someone talked about their kid. It was more like she was studying something unfamiliar. You talk about her differently than most parents talk about their children, Catherine said. How do most parents talk about their children? Like they're performing. Like they need you to know what a good job they're doing. You just talk about her. Like she's a person you happen to be amazed by. Wait, Ethan looked at her. She is. That must be nice, being amazed by someone. The way she said it, casually, like she was commenting on the weather again, made something in Ethan's chest tighten. He had a feeling that Catherine Ellison had spent most of her life around people who amazed no one, least of all themselves. Tell me about your father, he said. I'd rather not. I know, that's why I'm asking. If someone digs into us, and they will, they'll ask personal questions. The kind of questions that couples answer without thinking. I need to know the real answers, not the press conference version. Catherine took a sip of wine. She held the glass the way some people hold weapons, loosely, but with intent. Richard Ellison was a self-made man who spent his entire life making sure everyone knew it, she said. He started with one motel in Tulsa when he was 24. By the time he was 50, he had hotels on 4 continents. He was brilliant and cruel and charming and petty, sometimes all within the same sentence. He used to say that kindness was a luxury the successful couldn't afford. Do you believe that? Some days. And the marriage clause. Catherine set the glass down. My mother died when I was 12. After that, my father became obsessed with legacy. Not just the company, the idea of the family. He wanted grandchildren. He wanted a dynasty. He told me once that a company without a family behind it was just a machine, and machines break down. He believed, really, deeply believed, That a woman running things alone would be perceived as vulnerable, that the market, the board, the competitors would all smell blood. Was he wrong? That's the worst part. He wasn't entirely wrong. The perception is real. I've fought it my whole career. Every board meeting, every investor call, every handshake. There's always someone in the room calculating whether I'm tough enough, stable enough, permanent enough. And the marriage clause was my father's way of solving that problem. Not by changing the perception, but by giving me someone to hide behind. And you resent him for it. I resent him for being right about the problem and wrong about the solution. Their food arrived. The risotto looked perfect. Ethan's pasta was decent, maybe a 7 out of 10. He decided not to tell Catherine that Lily made better noodles from a box. They ate in a silence that was surprisingly comfortable. Around them, the restaurant hummed with the small dramas of other people's lives. A couple arguing quietly over dessert. A group of friends laughing too loud. A woman reading alone at the bar with the focused intensity of someone who preferred books to people. Your turn, Catherine said, pushing her plate forward. Tell me something real. About what? About you. About Lily's mother. About whatever made you the kind of man who eats cereal for dinner and answers his phone at midnight. Ethan put his fork down. Her name was Jessica. We met in college. She was smart, funny, the kind of person who made everything feel like an adventure. We got married young, too young probably. We had Lily, and for about a year things were good. Not great, good. And then one morning I woke up and she was gone. 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 No note, no call, no warning, just an empty closet and a full crib. I stood in the bedroom for about 20 minutes, holding Lily, trying to figure out if I was dreaming. Then Lily started crying because she was hungry, and I realized it didn't matter whether I was dreaming or not. She needed breakfast. Did you look for her? For months. Filed a police report, called everyone she knew, spent every night after Lily went to sleep searching online. Eventually I got a letter from a lawyer. She wanted a divorce, no custody, no visitation, no contact, just out. Catherine was watching him with an expression he couldn't name. Not pity. She didn't seem like the type for pity. Something closer to recognition, like she was hearing a language she'd spoken herself. That must have broken something in you, she said. It broke a lot of things. But the thing about having a kid is, you don't get to stay broken. She needs breakfast. She needs bath time. She needs someone to read the same book 16 times in a row and act surprised at the ending every time. You can fall apart later, on your own time, in the shower or in the car, or in the 3 minutes between when she falls asleep and when the exhaustion knocks you out. And did you fall apart? Every day for about a year. Then one morning Lily looked at me and said, Daddy, you're my best friend, and I decided that falling apart was a luxury I couldn't afford. Your father would have been proud. Catherine's mouth twitched. Don't compare yourself to my father. You're nothing like him. How do you know? You've known me for 36 hours. Because my father never would have eaten cereal for dinner. He would have called someone to make him a 4-course meal and then complained about the presentation. Ethan laughed. It was the first time he'd laughed. Really laughed. In weeks. And something in Catherine's face changed when he did. A crack in the surface. A flash of something warm and startled, like sunlight hitting a room that had been dark for too long. She looked away quickly. We should discuss logistics. Right. Logistics. The wedding needs to happen within 3 weeks. Small, private, but not suspiciously private. A few witnesses, a nice venue, enough photographs to establish credibility without looking staged. And the living arrangement? I have a house in Lincoln Park. 6 bedrooms. You and Lily would have your own wing. Separate entrance, separate space. To the outside world, we're a couple. Inside the house, we're roommates with a very unusual lease. Roommates, Ethan repeated. I haven't had a roommate since college. He used to microwave fish at 2 a.m. I don't microwave fish. Then we're already off to a better start. Catherine pulled out her phone and scrolled through something. There's a charity gala next Saturday at the Art Institute. It's the kind of event where people notice who you're with. I think we should go together, as our public debut. If you want to call it that. What do I wear? Sandra will send you to my tailor. I have a suit. You have a suit that costs $300. The people at this gala can price a jacket from across the room. If you show up looking like you wandered in from a different tax bracket, Marcus will know something's wrong before the appetizers. Ethan leaned back in his chair. So I need a costume. You need armor. There's a difference. She paid for dinner. He didn't argue, because arguing about a dinner check with a billionaire seemed like a waste of everyone's energy. And they walked outside into the cold. The street was quiet, just a few couples walking past, a cab idling at the corner. I should get home, Ethan said. Mrs. Huang is with Lily, but she gets grumpy if I'm out past 10. Mrs. Huang? My neighbor. She watches Lily when I have emergencies. She's 72, she's terrifying, and she makes the best dumplings in the state of Illinois. Catherine smiled. It was small and involuntary, like a reflex she hadn't managed to suppress. Ethan. Yeah. Are you sure about this? Really sure? Because once we start, there's no easy way to stop. He looked at her standing on the sidewalk in her dark coat, the restaurant's light spilling across her face, and he thought about how strange it was. Two people standing at the edge of something enormous, connected by nothing except desperation and a legal clause written by a dead man. I'm not sure about anything, he said, but I'm showing up. She nodded. That's enough. For now. They went their separate ways. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved fast. Ethan told David Park to finalize the contract, and after 3 rounds of revisions, mostly about Lily's protections and the exit clause, both parties signed. Catherine's legal team filed the paperwork. A marriage license was obtained from the Cook County Clerk's office. A ceremony was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at a small event space in Wicker Park, chosen because it was beautiful enough to photograph well and obscure enough that no one would notice until they wanted them to. During those 2 weeks, Ethan and Catherine saw each other almost every day. Coffee in the morning, working meetings in the afternoon, the occasional dinner. They were building the story, layering it with details, habits, small touches that would make it feel lived in. He learned that she took her coffee black, but added sugar when she thought no one was looking. She learned that he always checked his phone at 3:15, because that was when Lily's bus arrived at the after-school program and the counselor sent a confirmation text. They talked about their lives, not in long confessional monologues, but in the small, disjointed way that people actually get to know each other, through interruptions, tangents, half-finished thoughts. She told him about the summer she'd spent in Tokyo when she was 19, working at one of her father's hotels as a front desk clerk because he'd insisted she learn the business from the ground up. He told her about this time Lily had put a goldfish in his coffee mug because she thought it needed a warmer home. They argued, too, about the gala. Ethan thought she was overthinking the guest list. Catherine thought he was underthinking the optics. About Marcus. Ethan wanted to approach him directly. Catherine insisted that direct confrontation would only accelerate his timeline. About the house, Ethan visited the Lincoln Park property and found it absurdly large, the kind of place where you could lose a small child for hours. Lily will need a GPS tracker, he said, standing in the foyer. It's not that big. Catherine, this foyer has an echo. It's a well-designed space. It's a well-designed cathedral. But they made it work. Ethan moved Lily's things into the east wing over a weekend, setting up her room with her own furniture, her own books, her own nightlight. He put the purple horse drawing on the wall next to her bed. Lily walked into the new room, looked around and said, Daddy, this room is the same size as our whole apartment. I know, Lil. Can I roller skate inside? Absolutely not. What about just in the hallway? We'll negotiate. The wedding was small and efficient and strange. Sandra was a witness. David Park was a witness. The officiant was a retired judge Catherine had known for years. Ethan wore the suit Sandra's tailor had made for him. Dark blue, perfectly fitted, the kind of suit that made him look like a different version of himself. Catherine wore a simple cream dress and no jewelry except a pair of pearl earrings that had been her mother's. They stood across from each other in the small event space, which was filled with white flowers that Sandra had ordered that morning, and said the words, the legal words, the binding words, the words that, in any other context, would have meant something entirely different. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," There was a beat of silence. Ethan and Catherine looked at each other, and in that look was everything they hadn't said. The absurdity, the gravity, the terrifying gamble of what they were doing. Then Ethan leaned in and kissed her, briefly and carefully, the way you touch something you're not sure is real. Catherine's hand came up to his arm during the kiss, just for a second, just her fingers pressing against his sleeve. And then it was over, and Sandra was taking photos, and David was shaking hands, and the judge was packing up his briefcase. They were married. That night, Ethan put Lily to bed in her new room and sat on the floor beside her bed while she talked about her day. She'd found a ladybug at recess. Her friend Marco had fallen off the monkey bars but was okay. She wanted to know why there were so many rooms in this house and whether anyone lived in all of them. "Just us and Catherine," Ethan said. "Is Catherine your friend?" He hesitated. "Yeah, Lil. She's my friend. She's pretty. She is. Does she like horses?" "I don't know. You should ask her." "Okay. Good night, Daddy." "Good night, kiddo." He kissed her forehead and turned off the light, leaving the nightlight glowing pink. Then he walked downstairs to the living room where Catherine was sitting on the sofa with her laptop, her shoes kicked off, her feet tucked under her. "She's asleep?" Catherine asked without looking up. "She wants to know if you like horses." "Horses?" "She's 5. Horses are her whole personality right now." Catherine closed her laptop. "I rode when I was younger. My father had horses at our place in Connecticut. I was decent at it, not great. I fell off a lot." Lily would love that story. "The falling part?" "Especially the falling part. She's very pro-falling. She thinks it's the funniest thing that can happen to a person." Catherine looked at him across the living room. This enormous room in this enormous house where they were now legally, officially, absurdly married. And something passed between them. Not attraction, not exactly. Something more like the cautious awareness that happens when two people realize they might actually be able to stand each other. "The gala is Saturday," she said. "Sandra's arranged a car for 7. We'll arrive together, stay for 2 hours minimum, be seen by the right people, and leave." "And Marcus?" "He'll be there. He always is. He treats these events like campaign stops." "Should I be worried?" "About Marcus? He's a predator, Ethan. Predators are predictable. They go after weakness. Our job is to make sure he doesn't find any." Ethan sat down in the chair across from her. "And what if he finds out the truth?" "Then we handle it. That's what you do, isn't it? Handle things?" "Usually the things I handle don't involve my name on a marriage certificate." Catherine picked up her laptop again. "Welcome to the big leagues." He went upstairs to his own room, the east wing, 3 doors down from Lily's, and lay on a bed that was too soft and too large and too quiet. Through the wall, he could hear the faint hum of the house's systems. Heating, ventilation, the mechanical breathing of a home that cost more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. He closed his eyes and thought about what he'd done. Married a woman he'd known for 2 weeks. Moved his daughter into a stranger's house. Attached his name, his reputation, his entire life to a plan that depended on convincing the world that a lie was the truth. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice, the voice that sounded like his father, like Peoria, like Greece and honesty, said, You better know what you're doing, son." He didn't, not really, but the contract was signed, the papers were filed, and the gala was in 4 days. There was no going back now. The gala was everything Ethan expected and nothing he was ready for. The Art Institute glowed against the night sky like something out of a film. The kind of building that reminded you, every time you stood in front of it, that some people lived in a completely different version of the world. Spotlights swept across the facade. Town cars lined up along Michigan Avenue, discharging men and women dressed in fabrics that probably had their own insurance policies. Photographers clustered near the entrance, their flashes popping like small, controlled explosions every time someone worth knowing stepped onto the carpet. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks in the back seat of the car. His hands were steady, but his stomach wasn't. "Stop fidgeting," Catherine said beside him. "I'm not fidgeting. I'm adjusting." "You've adjusted those cufflinks 4 times since we left the house. They're new. I'm not used to wearing things that cost more than my rent." Catherine turned to look at him. She was wearing a deep emerald dress, simple in cut but devastating in effect. Her hair was pulled back, and the pearl earrings, her mother's, caught the light from the street. "You look fine," she said. "Fine." "Good. You look good. Is that what you need to hear?" "I need to hear that there's an open bar." "There are 3 open bars." "Then I'll survive." The car stopped. The door opened. The night rushed in. Cold air. Camera clicks. The murmur of a crowd that existed in a permanent state of curated elegance. Catherine stepped out first. Ethan followed. He offered his arm because that's what the script called for, and she took it with the practiced ease of someone who'd been navigating these events since she was old enough to wear heels. They walked toward the entrance together, and Ethan felt the weight of 100 small assessments, eyes scanning them, calculating, categorizing. Who is he? Where did he come from? Is he someone? "Smile," Catherine murmured. "I am smiling." "You are grimacing. There's a difference." They entered the main hall, and Ethan's breath caught despite himself. The space had been transformed. Tables draped in white, centerpieces that looked like miniature gardens, a string quartet playing something he almost recognized in the far corner. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across the ceiling like frozen rain. The room was already half full, and the sound of it, the collective hum of 300 people engaged in the performance of wealth, was louder than Ethan had anticipated. Sandra appeared almost immediately, materializing from the crowd like she'd been standing there all along. "Table 12, she said. "You're seated with the Bergmans, the Okafor Smiths, and David Liu from the Tribune." "A reporter?" Ethan said. "Features, not hard news. He's covering the gala for the lifestyle section. He'll ask easy questions. Be charming." "I'm always charming." Sandra gave him a look that suggested she had a very different definition of always. Catherine guided him through the room, introducing him to people whose names he forgot almost instantly, not because he didn't care, but because there were too many, and each introduction came with its own set of invisible rules. The handshake duration, the eye contact calibration, the precise angle of the smile. These people communicated in a language built entirely on subtext, and Ethan felt like a man who'd learned the vocabulary but not the grammar. But he watched Catherine, and he learned. She moved through the room the way water moves through rock, finding every gap, filling every space, never forcing anything. She laughed at the right moments, asked the right questions, touched the right arms. She introduced Ethan as "my husband," with a casualness that made it sound like the most natural sentence in the world. And every time she said it, something small and strange happened in Ethan's chest. They were 20 minutes in when Marcus arrived. He came through the main entrance with a woman on his arm. Tall, blonde, striking in that symmetrical way that looked more manufactured than born. Marcus was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, and his smile was wide and predatory. He worked the room in the opposite direction from Catherine, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, leaning in to whisper things that made people laugh. "He's good at this," Ethan said quietly. "He should be. He's been rehearsing his entire life." "So have you." Catherine glanced at him. "The difference is, I also do the work." At dinner, the conversation around the table was carefully choreographed small talk, renovations, travel, someone's daughter getting into a school that apparently only accepted the children of minor deities. David Liu, the reporter, asked Ethan and Catherine how they'd met, and Ethan delivered the story they'd rehearsed: a professional introduction through mutual colleagues, a series of casual dinners, an unexpected connection. "It was one of those things that takes you by surprise," Catherine said, looking at Ethan. "You spend your whole life thinking you know exactly what you want, and then someone walks in and rearranges the blueprint." She said it so naturally, so simply, that for a half-second Ethan almost believed it himself. David Liu smiled and wrote something in a small notebook. "That's a great quote. Mind if I use it?" "Not at all," Catherine said. Under the table, her hand found Ethan's knee and squeezed. A signal. "You're doing fine. Stay the course." He covered her hand with his, another signal, answering hers. "I'm here. We're holding." After dinner, the crowd redistributed itself across the main hall. People migrated toward the bars, the dance floor, the small clusters of conversation that formed and dissolved like weather patterns. Ethan excused himself to find a bathroom and spent 2 minutes staring at himself in the mirror above the sink. His reflection stared back. A man in a borrowed suit, a borrowed life, a borrowed identity. The same face Lily looked at every morning, the same hands that made her breakfast and tied her shoes. But here, in this marble bathroom with gold fixtures and towels that were softer than his pillows at home, that face looked like it belonged to someone else. Get it together, he told himself. He dried his hands and walked back into the hall. He was halfway to Catherine when a hand landed on his shoulder. Marcus Ellison. Ethan, we haven't had a chance to talk tonight. Marcus's grip was firm, friendly in the way that a vice grip is friendly. He was smiling, and his teeth were very white and very straight. Great event, Ethan said. Isn't it? Catherine always picks the best galas. She has impeccable taste. Marcus paused, and his eyes traveled over Ethan the way someone might inspect a car they were thinking about buying. In everything, apparently. Thanks, I think. Marcus steered him toward a quiet alcove near the East Gallery, away from the crowd. It was the kind of move that looked casual but wasn't. A predator creating separation between the target and the herd. I have to say, Marcus began, swirling his drink, I was surprised when I heard about the marriage. Catherine's always been so focused on the company, so committed to the work. I didn't even know she was seeing someone. We kept things private. Private, sure. Marcus sipped his drink. You know, Ethan, I don't know much about you, just what I've been able to find. Crisis consultant, small firm, single father. Solid reputation, but not exactly the kind of profile that usually ends up in Catherine's orbit. People end up in all kinds of orbits. They do. But usually there's a gravitational force, money, power, social connection. You don't seem to have any of those. No offense. None taken. I've never had much use for gravity. Marcus laughed, a short, controlled sound that had nothing to do with humor. I like that. You're funny. Catherine could use someone funny. She's always been a little too serious for her own good. He leaned in, lowering his voice. But between us, Ethan, and I say this as family, the timing is interesting, don't you think? Catherine, who hasn't had a public relationship in 3 years, suddenly gets married 6 weeks before the estate finalizes. You can see how someone might wonder. People can wonder all they want. Oh, they will. Trust me. Especially the board, especially the lawyers. Marcus straightened up and patted Ethan's shoulder again. But hey, I'm sure it's all perfectly genuine. Love works in mysterious ways, right? It does. Well, Marcus raised his glass. To the happy couple. He walked away, and Ethan stood in the alcove, his pulse thudding in his temples. The conversation had lasted maybe 3 minutes, but it had the density of a deposition. Marcus hadn't accused him of anything. He hadn't needed to. He'd planted the seeds, doubt, suspicion, the suggestion that something wasn't right. And now he'd step back and let them grow. Ethan found Catherine near the string quartet, talking to an older woman in a red gown. He waited until the conversation ended, then pulled her aside. Marcus just cornered me. What did he say? He said the timing is interesting. He said the board and the lawyers would wonder. He didn't come out and say it's fake, but he might as well have drawn a picture. Catherine's jaw tightened. What did you say? I played dumb, gave him nothing. Good. That's exactly right. Marcus operates on innuendo. He plants ideas and lets other people water them. If he had actual evidence, he wouldn't be fishing at a gala. He'd be filing in court. He will file in court eventually. Eventually isn't tonight. Tonight we smile, we dance, we leave together, and tomorrow morning David Liu publishes a lovely profile about the newly married Ellison couple in the Tribune Lifestyle section. You plan that. The reporter. Of course I plan that. I plan everything. Ethan looked at her. Do you ever get tired of planning everything? Something flickered in her eyes. Every single day. The string quartet shifted into a slower number, and Catherine took his hand. Dance with me. I should warn you, I'm a terrible dancer. I know. I had Sandra pull your college records. You dropped ballroom dance after 2 weeks. She found my college records. Sandra can find anything. They moved to the floor, and Ethan put his hand on her waist the way the tailor had shown him during a very awkward fitting appointment. Catherine's hand settled on his shoulder, light but deliberate. They swayed more than danced, a graceless, honest effort that somehow looked more real than any of the polished couples gliding around them. "People are watching," Catherine murmured. "Let them." "Marcus is watching. Let him." She looked up at him. They were close enough that he could see the small scar on her left temple. She told him about it 2 days ago, a childhood accident involving a bookshelf and a stepladder, and the faint lines at the corners of her eyes that her photographs never showed. "You're better at this than I expected," she said. "At dancing. At pretending. Maybe I'm not pretending everything." The words came out before he could stop them. Catherine's hand tightened on his shoulder, and for a moment, just a moment, the performance dissolved, and there were just two people standing too close together on a crowded floor, caught in something neither of them had planned for. Then the music ended, and Catherine stepped back and the mask returned. "We should go," she said. 2 hours. That was the plan. Right, the plan. They left through a side entrance. The car was waiting. They rode home in silence, the city scrolling past the windows like a projection of someone else's life. The next morning, Ethan woke to his phone buzzing with messages. David Liu's piece had been published in the Tribune's online edition. The headline read, "Ellison Hospitality Heir Steps Out with New Husband at Art Institute Gala." The article was favorable, warm even. It described them as a refreshingly grounded couple and quoted Catherine's line about rearranging blueprints. There was a photo of them dancing, and in the photo, they looked like people who meant it. Ethan stared at the photo for a long time. His phone rang. "David Park. Have you seen the Tribune?" "Yeah." "You look like you're in love." "I look like a man trying not to step on someone's feet." "Same thing, if you think about it." David paused. "Listen, I got a call this morning. A lawyer named Vivian Cross. She represents Marcus Ellison. She's requesting a meeting." Ethan sat up in bed. "A meeting about what?" She didn't specify, but she mentioned the trust, the estate timeline, and, her exact words, irregularities in recent filings. She means the marriage. That's what I assumed. She wants to meet Thursday. Set it up, but at our location, not theirs. And David, find out everything you can about Vivian Cross before Thursday. Already on it. Ethan hung up and went downstairs. Lily was in the kitchen, sitting at the enormous island counter, eating toast with an improbable amount of jam on it. Catherine was at the far end of the counter with her laptop, and between them sat a plate of cut fruit that someone, Sandra, probably, had arranged with the precision of a still life. "Daddy," Lily said. "Catherine told me she used to ride horses, and she fell off, and one time a horse ate her hat. That's a great story. I told her about my purple horse, and she said she wished horses could be purple because then they'd be more interesting." Ethan looked at Catherine. Catherine looked at her laptop. "She asked," Catherine said without looking up. "I answered." Ethan poured himself coffee and sat down. The domesticity of the scene, the toast, the fruit, the morning light coming through the kitchen windows, made something ache in his chest. Not because it was real, but because it wasn't. It was a set piece, a constructed image of a life that didn't actually belong to any of them. And yet Lily was happy. She was eating her jam toast and talking about purple horses and sitting in a kitchen that was warm and bright and full of the kind of casual safety that Ethan had spent 3 years trying to build from nothing. He took a sip of coffee and watched Catherine pretend to focus on her laptop while Lily told her about a dream involving a talking fish. Catherine was listening, really listening, with that same quiet intensity she'd had at the Italian restaurant. And once, when Lily said something particularly absurd about the fish wanting to be a dentist, Catherine's mouth twitched, and she covered it with her hand. Thursday came fast. The meeting with Vivian Cross took place at David Park's office. A modest space in the loop that smelled like coffee and printer ink. Vivian arrived exactly on time, which Ethan noted. She was in her 50s, sharp-featured, with silver hair cut close to her head, and a briefcase that looked like it had survived several wars and won all of them. "Thank you for meeting with us," Vivian said, shaking hands with Ethan and David. "I'll get right to the point, if you don't mind." "Please," David said. "My client, Marcus Ellison, has concerns about the recent marriage between Catherine Ellison and Mr. Cole. Specifically, he believes the marriage was entered into primarily to satisfy the trust clause requiring Ms. Ellison to be legally married before the estate finalization. That's an accusation, David said. It's a concern. There's a difference. Not in legal terms. Vivian opened her briefcase and produced a thin folder. The marriage took place 23 days after Mr. Cole and Ms. Ellison's first documented meeting. There is no evidence of a prior relationship, no social media history, no mutual connections, no shared events. The timeline candidly strains credibility. Ethan kept his face neutral. Catherine and I met through professional channels. Not everything is documented on Instagram. Of course not. But my client has a legitimate interest in the integrity of the trust process. If the marriage is genuine, then there's no issue. But if it was arranged specifically to circumvent the trust clause, that constitutes fraud. It's not fraud, David said. Then you won't mind providing evidence that the relationship predates the marriage. Communication records, witness statements, anything that establishes a genuine connection. David looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Vivian. We'll take that under advisement, Ethan said. Please do. My client intends to raise these concerns formally at the board meeting next month. He wants the board to review the marriage before the estate finalizes. The board doesn't have jurisdiction over personal matters, David said. No, but they have jurisdiction over governance. And if they determine that the trust clause was satisfied through fraudulent means, they can vote to invalidate the transfer of shares. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. Vivian shook hands again, crisp, professional, no warmth, and left. David sat back in his chair and rubbed his face. She's good. She's terrifying. Same thing. Ethan, listen. She's right about the timeline. 23 days is thin. If Marcus pushes this at the board meeting and the board votes to investigate, we're going to need more than a rehearsed story and a nice photo from the Tribune. What do we need? Proof. Real proof that this isn't what it looks like. Ethan stared at the wall behind David's desk. There was a framed law degree and a photo of David's kids at a baseball game. Normal things. The props of a normal life. The problem, Ethan said slowly, is that it is what it looks like. I know. So we need to make it look like something else. That's the polite way of putting it. Ethan stood up and walked to the window. Below, the city churned. Traffic, pedestrians, the endless machinery of ordinary life. Somewhere out there, Marcus Ellison was sitting in a room, planning his next move, calculating the exact amount of pressure needed to crack the whole thing open. Set up a meeting with Catherine, Ethan said. Tonight. We need to prepare for the board meeting. And David, I need you to pull every precedent you can find on trust clause challenges. Every case, every ruling, every dissent. I want to know every way this can go wrong before Marcus does. That's a lot of cases. Then start reading. Ethan left the office and stepped onto the sidewalk. The wind was sharp and it smelled like rain. He pulled his coat tighter and started walking, faster than he needed to, as if speed could outrun the feeling settling in his gut. Marcus was coming. Not eventually. Now. And the only thing standing between Catherine's empire and its destruction was a story that wasn't true, told by two people who were just beginning to wonder if it should be. Catherine didn't say anything for a long time after Ethan told her about the meeting with Vivian Cross. They were in the study of the Lincoln Park House, a room lined with bookshelves that Catherine's father had filled with leather-bound volumes he'd never read, because Richard Ellison believed that the appearance of intellectualism was as valuable as the real thing. Catherine was standing by the fireplace, which wasn't lit, her arms crossed, staring at the empty grate as if it owed her something. She used the word fraud, Catherine finally said. She did. And Marcus is bringing this to the board. Next month, formally. Catherine uncrossed her arms and pressed both palms flat against the mantel. How many board members does he need? Simple majority, 7 out of 12. If he convinces 7 members that the marriage is fraudulent, they can vote to investigate. And if the investigation finds what he wants it to find, they can block the share transfer. He doesn't have 7. Are you sure about that? Catherine turned around. Her face was controlled, but her eyes were doing something different, running calculations, measuring distances, the way they always did when she was under pressure. I have 6 board members who are loyal to me. Definitively loyal. They've been with the company since my father's time. and they've watched me run operations for 3 years. They know what I'm capable of. And the other 6? 3 are neutral. They'll go wherever the wind blows. 2 are sympathetic to Marcus. He's been cultivating them for months, dinners, golf, the whole performance. And one, she paused. One is Eleanor Vance. Who's Eleanor Vance? She was my father's oldest friend. She's been on the board for 22 years. She's 81, she's sharp as a scalpel, and she has never once told me what she's thinking. So she's the swing vote. She's the entire game. If Eleanor sides with me, the neutrals follow. If she sides with Marcus, I lose at least 2 of my loyalists who won't want to be on the wrong side of history. Ethan sat down on the sofa and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Then we need to talk to Eleanor. You don't talk to Eleanor. Eleanor talks to you when and if she feels like it. She once made my father wait 3 weeks for a phone call because he'd interrupted her during a Verdi opera. I already like her. Everyone likes her. That's what makes her dangerous. Ethan pulled out his phone and opened the calendar. The board meeting is in 19 days. Between now and then, Marcus is going to do 3 things. First, he's going to build his case, documentation, timeline analysis, anything that makes our marriage look manufactured. Second, he's going to lobby the neutral board members. Private meetings, off-the-record conversations, favors. Third, and this is the one I'm worried about, he's going to go public. Public how? Press. Not the lifestyle section. Business press. Financial journalists who cover corporate governance. He'll leak the fraud theory, not as a claim but as a question. Sources close to the family have raised concerns. That kind of thing. He won't put his name on it, but the story will run, and once it runs, the board can't ignore it. Catherine sat down across from him. So what do? We do what I do for every client. We get ahead of it. We control the narrative before Marcus does, and we give the board a reason to believe in us that's stronger than the reason Marcus gives them to doubt us. And how exactly do we do that when the marriage is... She stopped herself, looked at the door, even though it was closed, lowered her voice. When the marriage is exactly what Marcus says it is. Ethan met her eyes. We make it real. It is real. Legally. I don't mean legally, I mean visibly, substantively, undeniably real. We've been treating this like a performance with an audience. But Marcus's attack isn't about what people see. It's about what they feel. If the board sits in that room and looks at us and feels, in their gut, not in their heads, that we're genuine, Marcus loses. Because no amount of timeline analysis can compete with conviction. You're saying we need to be more convincing. I'm saying we need to stop being convincing and start being honest. Catherine stared at him. That's a contradiction. No, it's not. The best way to lie is to find the truth inside the lie and lead with that. And what truth is inside this particular lie? Ethan held her gaze. That we actually like each other. That spending time together isn't the chore we expected it to be. That your daughter, that Lily thinks you're interesting, which is the highest compliment a 5-year-old can give. That we argue about stupid things and agree on important things, and that somewhere between the contract negotiations and the dance floor, something happened that neither of us planned for. The room was very quiet. Catherine looked away first. She picked up a pen from the side table and turned it between her fingers. A nervous habit Ethan had noticed in the second week, the way she handled small objects when she was processing something she didn't want to say out loud. You're good at this, she said. Making things sound true. Maybe they are true. Ethan. Catherine. We can't afford to confuse the strategy with the situation. I'm not confusing anything. I'm telling you that the best defense we have against Marcus isn't a legal argument or a media strategy. It's the fact that we actually work. Together. In a way that neither of us expected. And if we lean into that, if we stop treating this like a business arrangement and start treating it like a partnership, the board will see it, and Marcus won't be able to touch it. Catherine set the pen down. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that Ethan could hear the house settling around them, the small sounds of a building adjusting itself to the cold. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay. We do it your way. But I need you to understand something. She stood up and walked to the window. The streetlights outside cast long shadows through the glass. My entire life, I've been performing for people. For my father, for the board, for the press, for every man who looked at me and saw either a threat or an opportunity. I don't know how to stop performing. It's the only mode I have. That's not true. How would you know? Because I've seen you with Lily, the horse story, the fish dentist conversation. The way you looked at her when she was telling you about her friend Marco's monkey bar incident. You weren't performing, you were just there. Catherine's reflection in the window was harder to read than her actual face. She's easy. Children are easy. They don't have agendas. Neither do I. She turned back to him. There was something raw in her expression now, unguarded, almost frightened, as if the prospect of being genuine was more terrifying than any corporate battle Marcus could throw at her. I'll try, she said. I'm not promising I'll be good at it. You don't have to be good at it. You just have to be real. Real. She said the word like she was trying it on for the first time. That's a very strange thing to ask of someone you married under contract. We're a very strange situation. Over the next 2 weeks, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment where everything changed. It was more like the slow turning of a season, barely noticeable day to day, but undeniable when you looked back. Ethan and Catherine started eating dinner together. Not the strategic dinners at expensive restaurants, but actual dinners, at the kitchen island, with Lily between them. The kind of meals where someone spilled something and someone else laughed and no one was dressed for a photograph. Catherine, who had never cooked a meal in her life, attempted to make spaghetti one evening and produce something that looked like a crime scene. Lily declared it the best spaghetti ever, out of either genuine enthusiasm or 5-year-old diplomacy, and Ethan ate the entire plate without complaint, though his eyes watered. You're being polite, Catherine said. I'm being supportive. You're being a liar. It's terrible. It's not terrible. It's enthusiastic. The sauce has a lot of personality. The sauce has a lot of garlic. I may have tripled the recipe. You tripled the garlic? I thought more was better. In garlic, more is never better. That's the first rule of garlic. Lily, who had sauce on her chin, her forehead, and somehow in her hair, said, Daddy, I want Catherine to cook every night. See, Catherine said, the child has spoken. They developed routines. Morning coffee before Lily woke up. Catherine at one end of the island, Ethan at the other, the house still quiet around them. Catherine would read financial reports on her tablet while Ethan scrolled through his case files, and occasionally one of them would say something about the weather, about a headline, about nothing in particular, and the other would respond, and the silence between the words felt comfortable rather than empty. In the evenings, after Lily was asleep, they'd sit in the study and work through the board meeting preparation. Catherine walked Ethan through every board member's history, priorities, and pressure points. He walked her through crisis communication strategy, how to frame the narrative, how to anticipate Marcus's arguments, how to turn the board's skepticism into curiosity rather than opposition. Eleanor Vance is the key, Ethan said one night, 3 days before the meeting. We need to meet with her before the board convenes. I told you, Eleanor doesn't take meetings. Then we go to her? Where does she live? Lake Forest. She has an estate. Call her. Tell her you'd like to visit. Bring Lily. Catherine looked at him. Bring Lily? Eleanor is 81 years old. She's been on the board for 2 decades. She's seen every corporate maneuver, every power play, every bit of theater that money can buy. You're not going to impress her with a strategy deck. But a 5-year-old who talks about purple horses? That's something she hasn't seen in a boardroom. You want to use your daughter as a prop. I thought that was against your rules. I'm not using her as a prop. I'm bringing my family to visit an old woman who probably hasn't had genuine company in years. There's a difference. Catherine hesitated. Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number she clearly knew by heart. Eleanor? It's Catherine. I was hoping we could visit this weekend. My husband and his daughter would love to meet you. A pause. Yes, husband. It's a recent development. I'll explain when we get there. She hung up. Saturday, 2 o'clock. She said to bring something sweet because her housekeeper won't let her buy pastries anymore. I'll make brownies. You bake? Lily and I bake. Badly. But with a lot of heart. Saturday arrived with the kind of bright, cutting cold that made Chicago feel like a city carved out of ice. They drove to Lake Forest in Catherine's car, Lily in the back seat, singing a song she'd invented about a bear who worked in an office, and pulled up to Eleanor Vance's estate at 5 minutes to 2. The house was old money incarnate, a stone manor set back from the road behind a wall of bare oaks. Eleanor met them at the door herself, which surprised Catherine. She was small, white-haired, and dressed in a cashmere sweater and wool trousers that suggested she'd been expecting them but hadn't bothered to fuss about it. "Catherine," Eleanor said, taking her hands. Then she looked at Ethan. "The husband." "Ethan Cole. It's an honor." "It's a social call. Save the honors for the boardroom." Her eyes dropped to Lily, who was holding the container of brownies with both hands and staring up at Eleanor with the fearless curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned to be intimidated by anything. "Who are you?" Eleanor asked. "I'm Lily. I made these brownies, but Daddy helped because the oven is hot." Eleanor took the container, opened it, inspected the brownies, which were lumpy and slightly burnt on one corner, and said, "These look terrible. I'm going to eat 3 of them." Lily beamed. They sat in Eleanor's living room, which was filled with art and antiques and the specific kind of warmth that only comes from a house that has been lived in for a very long time. Eleanor served tea and ate 2 brownies while Lily explored the room, asking questions about every painting and sculpture she encountered. "This one looks like a sad potato," Lily said, pointing at a bronze abstract sculpture. "That's a Giacometti," Eleanor said. "And you're absolutely right." Catherine and Ethan exchanged a glance. Lily had, in 60 seconds, accomplished what years of corporate politics had not. She'd made Eleanor Vance laugh. The conversation turned to business eventually, the way it always did. Catherine explained the trust clause, the marriage, the timeline. She was straightforward about it. No embellishment, no spin, just the facts. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When Catherine finished, the old woman set her teacup down and looked at Ethan. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked. Not accusatory, genuinely curious. Ethan looked at Lily, who was now sitting on the floor drawing a picture of Eleanor's sad potato sculpture with crayons Eleanor had produced from somewhere. "Because she asked me to," he said, nodding toward Catherine. "And because I could see that what Marcus wants to do to this company would hurt a lot of people. And because I needed to give my daughter a better life, and I wasn't too proud to admit that." "Honesty," Eleanor said. "That's refreshing. Dangerous, but refreshing." "Marcus will argue that the marriage is fraudulent," Catherine said. "I imagine he will." "And you? What do you think?" Eleanor picked up her 3rd brownie and took a bite. She chewed slowly, watching them both, the way Catherine's hand rested on the arm of the sofa near Ethan's, not touching, but close. The way Ethan's eyes kept tracking to Lily. The way the 3 of them occupied the room like a unit, imperfect and unmatched but somehow cohesive. "I think," Eleanor said carefully, "that your father was a brilliant man and a terrible judge of people. He thought structure could replace substance. He thought a clause in a trust document could guarantee stability." She paused. "And I think Marcus is counting on the board being afraid. Afraid of scandal, afraid of uncertainty, afraid of looking foolish." "And you?" Catherine asked again. "Are you afraid?" Eleanor smiled. It was small and ancient and full of something that might have been mischief. "My dear, I'm 81 years old. I have survived 4 recessions, 2 husbands, and a board seat with your father. Fear is no longer in my vocabulary." She didn't say which way she'd vote. She didn't need to. The conversation moved on to other things. Eleanor's garden, Lily's school, a story about Richard Ellison getting lost in a hotel in Dubai because he'd refused to ask for directions. By the time they left, the sun was low and the brownies were gone. In the car on the way home, Lily fell asleep in the back seat. Catherine stared out the passenger window, and Ethan drove, and neither of them spoke until they were back on the expressway. "She liked you," Catherine said. "She liked Lily." "She liked you too. She wouldn't have eaten 3 brownies if she didn't." "Is that how Eleanor Vance shows approval? Through baked goods?" "Through attention. She gave you her full attention for 2 hours. She hasn't done that with anyone since my father died." Ethan checked the rearview mirror. Lily was out cold, her head tilted against the car seat, her mouth slightly open. "The board meeting is in 3 days," he said. "I know." "Are you ready?" Catherine turned to look at him. In the fading light, with the highway stretching ahead of them, she looked different again. Not the CEO, not the strategist, not the woman who planned everything. Just a person sitting in a car, watching the world move past, carrying the weight of something she hadn't asked for and couldn't put down. "No," she said, "but I'm showing up." Ethan glanced at her and recognized his own words from weeks ago, given back to him in her voice. And something in the space between them, the front seat of a car with a sleeping child behind them and a fight ahead of them, felt less like an arrangement and more like the thing it was supposed to be pretending to be. He kept driving. The city grew closer, its light spreading across the horizon like a promise that hadn't decided yet whether to keep itself. The morning of the board meeting, Ethan woke up at 4:17 a.m. and couldn't go back to sleep. He lay in the dark and listened to the house, the hum of the heating system, the faint creak of old wood settling. Down the hall, Lily was sleeping. He knew because he'd checked on her twice already, standing in her doorway like a man guarding something he couldn't name. She'd kicked her blanket off. He'd put it back. She'd kicked it off again. He'd left it. At 5, he gave up on sleep and went downstairs. The kitchen was dark except for the light above the stove, which Catherine always left on, a habit she said she'd picked up from her mother, who'd believed that a house should never be completely dark. He made coffee. He drank it standing up, looking out the kitchen window at the backyard, which was just starting to emerge from the night. Gray shapes becoming trees, becoming fences, becoming the outline of a world that looked normal but wasn't. Catherine appeared at 5:40. She was already dressed, charcoal suit, white blouse, her mother's pearl earrings. Her hair was pulled back. She looked composed and prepared, and to anyone who didn't know her, completely in control. Ethan knew her now. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held her coffee cup with both hands, as if it were the only warm thing left in the world. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." She sat down at the island. "I've been going over the board member profiles since 3. I keep running scenarios, best case, worst case, every case in between. And I keep coming back to the same problem. We can prepare for Marcus's arguments. We can prepare for the legal challenge. We can prepare for the vote. But we can't prepare for the thing that actually matters, which is whether they believe us." Ethan set his coffee down. "Catherine." "What?" "Stop running scenarios. You've been running scenarios your whole life. You ran scenarios before the gala, before the Tribune article, before Eleanor. And every time the thing that actually worked wasn't the scenario, it was you. Being in the room, being real." She looked at him over her coffee cup. "That's easy for you to say. You're naturally real. I've been manufactured since birth." "You're not manufactured. You're defended. There's a difference. And today you need to lower the defenses." "In front of Marcus? In front of the board? That's like asking me to walk into a gunfight without armor." "No, it's like asking you to walk into a courtroom without a mask. The armor stays. The mask comes off." Catherine was quiet. The kitchen clock ticked in the silence, an old analog clock that Sandra had hung on the wall because she believed digital clocks were soulless. "What if it's not enough?" Catherine said. Her voice was quieter than Ethan had ever heard it. "What if I lower every defense, show them everything, give them the most honest version of myself I'm capable of? And they still side with Marcus?" Ethan walked around the island and sat on the stool next to her, close enough that their arms were almost touching. "Then we deal with it," he said. "Together, like we've dealt with everything else." She looked at him. And for the first time since he'd known her, Catherine Ellison didn't look like a CEO or a strategist or a woman at war with her own family. She looked like a person who was afraid and tired and holding on to something fragile. "Together," she repeated, as if testing the word, as if she'd never quite trusted it before. "Yeah." She nodded once. Then she put her coffee down, stood up, and said, "I'm going to check my notes one more time." "Of course you are." "Don't judge me." "I'm not judging you. I'm admiring your commitment to over-preparation." She almost smiled. Almost. Then she went upstairs, and Ethan sat in the kitchen alone and thought about what he'd just said. Together. He'd said it casually, like it was obvious, but it wasn't obvious. A few weeks ago, they'd been strangers connected by a contract and a legal clause. Now he was sitting in her kitchen at dawn, telling her they'd face whatever came next as a unit, and he meant it in a way that had nothing to do with the contract. That realization settled into him slowly, like cold water seeping through cloth. He wasn't pretending anymore. Maybe he hadn't been for a while. At 8:30, Sandra arrived with a car. Lily was dropped at school. Ethan walked her to the bus, held her hand, told her he'd be there when she got home. "Are you going to work, Daddy?" "Yeah, Lil. Big meeting." "Are you nervous?" "A little." She squeezed his hand. "Just do what you always tell me. Take a deep breath and remember you're brave." He knelt down and hugged her. She smelled like maple syrup and the lavender fabric softener he still used on her sheets. "I'll remember," he said. The Ellison Hospitality Group's corporate headquarters occupied the top 6 floors of a building on Wacker Drive. The boardroom was on the 44th floor, a vast, wood-paneled space with a table long enough to land a small aircraft. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the Chicago River and the city beyond, laid out in grids and angles like a machine designed by someone who believed in order. When Ethan and Catherine arrived, half the board members were already seated. Sandra had arranged name placards, water glasses, and document folders with military precision. A court reporter sat in the corner. Catherine had insisted on an official transcript because Marcus could spin a private conversation, but he couldn't rewrite a verbatim record. The board members filtered in over the next 10 minutes. Ethan studied each one, matching faces to the profiles Catherine had drilled into him. The Loyalists: Patricia Webb, James Okoro, Susan Chang, Robert Diaz, Michael Tan, Angela Morris, sat on Catherine's side of the table with the settled confidence of people who'd already made up their minds. The 2 Marcus sympathizers, Victor Hale and Richard Stafford, sat at the opposite end, leaning toward each other, whispering. The neutrals, Diana Reeves, Thomas Kraft, Martin Cho, clustered in the middle with the carefully blank expressions of people who intended to be persuaded by whoever made the best case. Eleanor Vance arrived last. She walked in at exactly 9 o'clock, wearing a navy blue jacket and a silk scarf that probably predated most of the people in the room. She sat down at the head of the table, not because it was assigned to her, but because no one had ever dared suggest she sit anywhere else, and folded her hands. "Good morning," she said. "Let's not waste time." Marcus entered 30 seconds later, flanked by Vivian Cross and a younger man Ethan didn't recognize, probably an associate. Marcus was wearing confidence like cologne, heavy, intentional, designed to fill the room before he even opened his mouth. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus said, taking his seat. "Thank you for making time for this. I know it's been called under unusual circumstances, and I appreciate the board's willingness to hear my concerns." Harold Kessler, the trustee, sat near the door with a legal pad and the expression of a man who had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. Eleanor called the meeting to order. Marcus's request was entered into the record, a formal challenge to the validity of Catherine's marriage as it related to the trust clause. Vivian Cross presented the case. She was methodical and devastating. She laid out the timeline. First documented meeting between Ethan and Catherine, marriage 23 days later, no prior relationship history, no mutual social connections, no evidence of a pre-existing romantic involvement. She presented financial analysis showing the strategic benefit of the marriage to Catherine's trust position. She referenced the trust clause directly, arguing that its intent was to ensure genuine partnership, not to create a loophole for contractual arrangements. The timeline speaks for itself, Vivian concluded. This marriage was entered into for the sole purpose of satisfying the trust clause. That constitutes a violation of both the spirit and the substance of the trust, and the board has a fiduciary responsibility to investigate. The room was very quiet. Marcus leaned forward. "I want to be clear. I'm not attacking Catherine personally. She's my family, and I respect what she's accomplished. But the integrity of this company depends on the integrity of its governance. If the trust clause can be circumvented through a manufactured marriage, then the entire structure my uncle built becomes meaningless. I owe it to his memory to make sure that doesn't happen. It was a good performance, polished, reasonable, almost sympathetic. Ethan could see it landing with the neutrals. Diana Reeves was nodding slightly, and Thomas Kraft was reviewing Vivian's timeline document with furrowed brows. Eleanor turned to Catherine. "Miss Ellison, you have the floor." Catherine stood. Ethan watched her take a breath, watched her shoulders settle, watched her choose, deliberately, to set something down that she'd been carrying her entire career. "Thank you, Eleanor," she said. "I'm going to be direct because I think this board deserves directness, and because I'm tired of performing." She paused. The room waited. "My father put a marriage clause in his trust because he believed I couldn't lead this company alone. He was wrong about that. I've been leading this company for 3 years, and every metric, revenue, occupancy, expansion, employee retention, has improved under my management. The numbers are in your quarterly reports. You've all seen them." She looked around the table. "But my father was right about something else. He was right that leadership requires partnership. Not because a woman can't do it alone. That's a dated, condescending idea that I rejected a long time ago. But because no one should have to do it alone. Because the best decisions are made by people who have someone to challenge them, push back on them, tell them when they're wrong." She turned to Ethan. "This is my husband. His name is Ethan Cole. We met 6 weeks ago, which is what Vivian's timeline says, and she's right about that. Our relationship moved fast, faster than either of us planned, and I understand why that raises questions." Marcus shifted in his seat. Vivian made a note. "But I want to tell you something about Ethan that the timeline doesn't show," Catherine continued. "On his first night in this world, my world, the world of contracts and clauses and power plays, he told me that his one non-negotiable condition was that his 5-year-old daughter would never be used as a prop. He looked me in the eye and said, 'She's my daughter, not a character in your corporate strategy.' That was the moment I knew I'd chosen the right person. Not because he was useful, because he had a line he wouldn't cross, even for $2 million. The room shifted. Ethan saw it. A subtle change in the atmosphere, like the air pressure adjusting before a storm. The neutrals were looking at him now, really looking, as if seeing him for the first time. "Marcus is asking you to believe that this marriage is a fraud," Catherine said. "He's asking you to believe that I would manipulate the trust my father built, deceive this board, and risk the reputation of a company I've given my entire adult life to, all for a legal loophole. And I want you to ask yourselves, does that sound like me? In 3 years of working with me, have I ever taken the easy way? Have I ever cut a corner? Have I ever asked you to trust me and then let you down?" Silence. Patricia Webb was watching Catherine with an expression that was close to fierce. "I'm not going to stand here and defend my marriage. I'm not going to produce text messages or social media posts or whatever evidence Vivian thinks should exist. Because real relationships don't live in timelines and documentation. They live in the moments nobody sees. They live in the 4 a.m. conversations about fear and failure. In the dinners where the spaghetti is terrible but everyone eats it anyway because a 5-year-old made it. In the decision to show up, not because you have to, but because you choose to." She looked at Marcus. "My cousin has spent the last 6 months positioning himself to take control of this company. He's had private meetings with board members. He's leaked stories to the press. He's hired lawyers to challenge a marriage he knows nothing about. And he's done all of this while contributing exactly nothing to the company's operations, strategy, or growth. Not one meeting attended, not one report filed, not one employee interaction. He wants the crown without doing the work. That's not leadership. That's ambition without substance." Marcus's composure cracked. Not a lot. Just a tightening around the jaw, a flash of something hard in his eyes. He opened his mouth, but Vivian put a hand on his arm. "Respectfully," Vivian said, "the question before the board is not about Mr. Ellison's contributions. It's about the validity of the trust clause compliance." "The question before the board," Catherine said, "is whether they trust me. That's always been the question. My father tried to answer it with a clause. Marcus is trying to answer it with a legal challenge. But the real answer is in this room, in the work I've done, in the company I've built on the foundation my father laid." She sat down. The room was still. Ethan could hear the ventilation system humming. He could hear the court reporter's fingers hovering over the keys. Eleanor Vance looked at Marcus. "Mr. Ellison, do you have a response?" Marcus stood. He was rattled. Ethan could see it in the way he buttoned his jacket, a displacement gesture, buying time. With all due respect to Catherine, emotion isn't evidence, Marcus said. She gave a moving speech, but she didn't address the core issue. The timeline is suspicious. The marriage is convenient. And the board has a responsibility to ensure that the trust clause is honored as intended, not circumvented through a strategic arrangement. Then let me address it, Ethan said. Every head in the room turned to him. He hadn't planned to speak. Catherine's strategy had called for him to be present but silent, a supporting character, not a principal. But sitting in that chair watching Marcus try to rebuild his case on the rubble of Catherine's speech, something in Ethan broke loose. Not anger, not strategy, something more personal. "My name is Ethan Cole," he said, standing. "I'm a crisis consultant. I'm a single father. And yes, I married Catherine Ellison 6 weeks after I met her. Marcus is right. The timeline is fast. Vivian is right. There's no social media trail, no history of shared events, no Instagram posts with matching hashtags. Because that's not how we happened." He looked at Marcus. "You don't know me. You've been investigating me, which means you know my resume and my credit score and probably what kind of cereal I buy. But you don't know why I'm standing here, so let me tell you." He took a breath. "I'm standing here because 3 years ago, my daughter's mother walked out and left me with a baby and no plan. I'm standing here because I've spent every day since then trying to be enough. Enough parent, enough provider, enough of everything. And most days, I've fallen short. I'm standing here because when Catherine Ellison called me at midnight and told me her company was in danger, I saw a woman who was fighting for something bigger than herself, and I recognized that fight because I've been fighting it every morning since my daughter was born." The room was absolutely still. "You want to know if our marriage is real? I'll tell you what's real. 3 weeks ago, my daughter told Catherine a story about a talking fish, and Catherine listened to every word. Not because she had to, not because it was part of some strategy, but because she was interested. Because that's who she is when nobody's performing. Last week, Catherine tried to cook spaghetti for the first time in her life, and it was genuinely awful, and we ate it anyway, all 3 of us, sitting at the kitchen counter laughing about how much garlic she'd used. That's not a contract. That's Tuesday night at our house." He paused. "Marcus wants you to believe that I married Catherine for money. And yes, there's a financial component to our arrangement. I've never pretended otherwise. I'm not wealthy. I never will be. But the money isn't why I'm standing in this boardroom instead of walking out the door, which is something I could have done at any point in the last 6 weeks. I'm standing here because Catherine deserves to run this company, because she's earned it, because the 14,000 people who work for Ellison Hospitality deserve a leader who actually shows up, not a cousin who treats the company like a prize he can win by default." He looked at Eleanor. "I can't prove that my marriage is real by showing you a timeline. I can only prove it by being here, by choosing to be here, and by telling you honestly that what started as a professional arrangement has become something I didn't expect and don't fully understand and wouldn't trade for anything Marcus is offering." He sat down. Catherine was looking at him with an expression he'd never seen before, something between shock and gratitude and a third thing he couldn't name because he'd never seen it directed at him. Marcus's face was tight. "This is a corporate board meeting, not a therapy session. The question is legal, not emotional." "The question is trust," Eleanor said. Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of 2 decades of boardroom authority. "It has always been trust." She looked around the table. "I'm going to call for a vote. The motion before the board is Marcus Ellison's request for a formal investigation into the validity of Catherine Ellison's marriage as it relates to the trust clause. A vote in favor initiates the investigation. A vote against dismisses the motion. We'll proceed alphabetically." The vote went around the table. Martin Cho, against. Robert Diaz, against. Victor Hale, in favor. His voice was clipped, and he didn't look at Catherine. Thomas Kraft, the neutral. The room held its breath. He looked at his hands, then at Catherine, then at Ethan. "Against," he said. Angela Morris, against. James Okoro, against. Diana Reeves, another neutral. She took longer than the others, tapping her pen against the table in a rhythm that made Ethan's pulse match it. Against, she said. Richard Stafford. In favor. He and Hale exchanged a glance. Michael Tan. Against. Eleanor Vance. She paused. The entire room leaned forward by a fraction of an inch. Against, she said. And then, looking directly at Marcus, and I would advise Mr. Ellison to redirect his considerable energy towards something more productive than challenging the personal decisions of a woman who has done more for this company in 3 years than most people do in a career. Patricia Webb. Against? Susan Chang. Against. The final tally was 10 against, 2 in favor. Marcus's motion was dismissed. The room exhaled. Not literally, but the tension that had been holding everything rigid for the last hour released all at once, and people shifted in their chairs and reached for water glasses and made the small, restless movements of bodies that had been held too still for too long. Marcus stood. His face was controlled, but his hands weren't. Ethan could see the slight tremor in his fingers as he buttoned his jacket. The board has made its decision, Marcus said. I respect it, but I want it on the record that I believe this process has been compromised by sentiment rather than governed by substance. Noted, Eleanor said. And for the record, Mr. Ellison, sentiment built this company. Your uncle understood that, even when he got other things wrong. Marcus left the room without shaking anyone's hand. Vivian Cross followed, her briefcase swinging with the controlled efficiency of a woman who was already calculating the next move. But the next move, Ethan knew, had just gotten much harder. The board had not only rejected Marcus's motion, they'd humiliated him. And in corporate politics, humiliation was the one thing that couldn't be undone. After the boardroom cleared, Catherine and Ethan sat in the hallway outside, on a bench that looked like it had been designed for decorative purposes rather than actual sitting. Sandra had gone to arrange the car. The building was quiet around them. The hush of a corporate tower at mid-morning, all its dramas contained behind closed doors. Catherine was staring at the wall opposite, where a framed photograph of the Ellison Grand hung. The building at sunset, its glass facade reflecting the sky. You weren't supposed to speak, she said. I know. What you said in there about the spaghetti, about Lily, about choosing to be here, that wasn't in any plan. No. Then why did you say it? Ethan looked at her. She was sitting very straight, the way she always did, but her hands were in her lap, and they were shaking slightly. The way hands shake after a crisis passes and the body finally catches up to what the mind went through. Because it was true, he said, and because Marcus was winning and the only weapon I had left was the truth. You called it a weapon. Isn't it? In a room full of people who've been lied to their whole lives, the truth is the most dangerous thing you can say. Catherine was quiet. Then she said, Ethan, the contract. What about it? It expires in 14 months. I know. When it expires, we divorce. That's the plan. That's the structure. That's the architecture. She used the word deliberately, and they both heard its weight, her father's word, the word that had started all of this. Yeah, Ethan said. That's the plan. She turned to look at him. What if I don't want to follow the plan? The hallway was very quiet. Somewhere below them, the city hummed. Traffic, voices, the constant churning of 10 million lives. But up here, on the 44th floor, there was nothing but the two of them and the space between them, which had been shrinking for weeks and was now barely there at all. Catherine, Ethan said, don't say something practical. Don't say something strategic. I've had enough strategy to last me 3 lifetimes. Just tell me what you want. He thought about Lily, about the purple horse and the cereal dinners and the apartment that already felt like a memory, about Mrs. Huang and the dumplings and the Korean dramas, about the elevator ride up to the 42nd floor on a Tuesday night that felt like 100 years ago. And he thought about Catherine, not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the strategist, the woman who'd eaten terrible brownies with an 81-year-old and laughed at a 5-year-old's fish story and tried to cook spaghetti because she'd never done it before and wanted to know what it felt like to make something with her own hands. I want to stay, he said, not because of the contract, not because of the money, because every morning when I come downstairs and you're sitting at the counter with your coffee, pretending to read financial reports while Lily tells you about whatever dream she had, that's the first time in 3 years I haven't felt like I'm doing this alone. Catherine's composure, The composure she'd maintained through the meeting, through Marcus's attack, through Vivian's cross-examination, finally broke. Not dramatically, not with tears or collapse, just a softening, a letting go. The face behind the face. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to be someone's partner without a contract defining the terms. I don't know how to be a part of a family that isn't built on obligation and performance. I don't know how to be the person Lily thinks I am." Lily thinks you're a woman who fell off horses and liked it. She thinks you're interesting. That's a pretty good starting point. It's a terrifying starting point. Everything worth doing is terrifying. That's not a bumper sticker. That's just how it works. She laughed. It was rough and short and slightly unhinged, the kind of laugh that happens when the pressure finally releases and the body doesn't know whether to celebrate or collapse. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we go home. I pick up Lily from school. You pretend to work while she tells you about her day. I make dinner. Actual dinner, not cereal. And you sit at the counter and critique my cooking the way you critique quarterly reports." "I don't critique quarterly reports. I dismantle them." "Then dismantle my cooking. I can take it." "Your cooking deserves dismantling." "See, we're already communicating." Sandra appeared at the end of the hallway. "Car's ready." They stood up. And in the hallway of the 44th floor, in a building that belonged to a company that had nearly been taken from her, Catherine Ellison reached out and took Ethan Cole's hand. Not for a camera, not for a board member, not for a reporter or a cousin or a dead father's ghost, for herself. Because she wanted to. Because wanting to was enough. They rode the elevator down together. Sandra stood in the corner, pretending to check her phone, very deliberately not looking at their joined hands. In the car, Catherine called Harold Kessler. The estate finalization would proceed as scheduled. The trust clause had been satisfied. The shares would transfer to Catherine's control within 45 days. Kessler confirmed it all in his usual monotone, and Catherine thanked him. And that was that. 3 generations of legacy secured in a 2-minute phone call. Ethan looked out the window. Chicago was doing what Chicago always does, grinding forward, building and breaking and rebuilding, a city that had burned down and come back harder, the way stubborn things do. He thought about his father, about grease-stained hands and a bad back and the words, "Every decision you make is a door. Make sure you know what's on the other side before you walk through." He hadn't known what was on the other side. He'd walked through anyway, and what he'd found was something he couldn't have predicted. Not love at first sight, because that wasn't how this worked. Something messier, slower, less romantic, and more real. 2 people who'd been broken in different ways, by different forces, finding that their broken edges somehow fit. Not perfectly. Nothing about this was perfect. Catherine still worked too much and shared too little and defaulted to strategy when she should have defaulted to honesty. Ethan still second-guessed himself and ate cereal when he was stressed and had a habit of making jokes when he should have been serious. They argued about stupid things, whose turn it was to pick up Lily, whether the thermostat should be at 68 or 72, whether Lily needed more structure or more freedom. But they argued the way people argue when they plan to be around for the resolution, with frustration, not finality, with heat, not cruelty, with the underlying assumption that tomorrow they'd still be sitting at the same counter, drinking the same coffee, starting over. That evening, Ethan picked up Lily from the after-school program. She came running out with a painting, a house with 7 windows and a purple door and 3 stick figures in front of it, 1 tall, 1 medium, 1 small. "That's us," Lily said, pointing. "That's you, that's Catherine, that's me." "Where's Mrs. Huang?" "She's inside, she's making dumplings. You can't see dumplings in a painting, Daddy." "Fair point. Can we go home?" "Home." She said it without thinking, the way children say things when they're true. Without analysis, without strategy, without wondering whether the word was earned or appropriate or legally binding. "Yeah, Lil," Ethan said, let's go home." They drove back to the Lincoln Park house, where Catherine was sitting at the kitchen counter with her laptop closed for once, and a pot of water boiling on the stove because she was going to try spaghetti again. And this time, she was only going to double the garlic, not triple it. Lily burst through the door with her painting and ran straight to Catherine, who took it and studied it with the same intensity she brought to profit and loss statements. "The purple door is important," Lily explained, because purple means magic. I see, Catherine said. And why does our house have 7 windows? Because 7 is the best number. Everyone knows that. I didn't know that. Now you do. You're welcome. Ethan leaned against the kitchen doorframe and watched them. The billionaire and the 5-year-old bent over a painting of a house that didn't exist yet, discussing the magical properties of the color purple and the numerical superiority of 7. It was ridiculous and impractical and had no strategic value whatsoever. It was everything. There is something people don't tell you about the moments that change your life. They don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with music or lighting or a narrator's voice explaining what's happening. They come disguised as Tuesday nights and terrible spaghetti and conversations about talking fish. They come in the shape of a 5-year-old's painting, hung on a refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a ladybug. They come when you stop planning for them and start living in them. Ethan Cole walked into that kitchen, sat down at the counter, and started chopping onions for the spaghetti sauce. Catherine told him he was doing it wrong. Lily told them both that she didn't even like onions. The water boiled over because nobody was watching it, and Catherine burned her thumb on the pot handle, and Lily laughed so hard she fell off her stool. It was messy. It was loud. It was completely, stubbornly, defiantly imperfect. And for the first time in a very long time, maybe for the first time ever, Ethan Cole and Catherine Ellison were exactly where they were supposed to be. Not because a contract put them there, not because a clause demanded it, not because a dead man's architecture required it, because they chose it. Both of them. Together. And sometimes that's the only foundation that holds.